Welcome everyone to our discussion on listening, learning, and leading change through qualitative research. This year's event invites us to reflect on the transformative potential of qualitative inquiry, not only in the way we gather and interpret data, but also in how we engage with communities and contribute to meaningful change. We are a relatively small group, so what I'd like to be able to do is just have everybody introduce themselves, and kind of share where you are calling in from around the world, because we have various locations here. So I will start. My name is Dr. Kara Vanderlinden, and I am the founder and the director of the Institute for Research and Theory Methodologies, which is hosting the 2025 International Congress for Qualitative Research and Theory Methodologies. And our sponsor is CQ University, and so we really appreciate their support in helping us offer this month-long event. If you haven't had an opportunity so far, jump over to our YouTube page. I'll put the link later during the session. I'll put the link into the chat, but and check out, we have about 20 presentations on YouTube from this year, and then about 20 presentations from last year's event. So those are all available on our YouTube channel for you to watch and enjoy. Maureen, since you are the next person on my list of pictures, why don't you introduce yourself next?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Maureen Molinari. I am a board member for RTM. I'm also core faculty in the Integrative and Functional Nutrition Department at Saybrook. And I don't know what else to say.
Tell us where you're located.
I'm in Jackson, Wyoming.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Welcome. Lisa.
Hi, everybody. My name's Dr. Lisa Goldberg, and I'm in Ohio in the United States, and it is getting cold here. Let's see. I serve as the president for RTM, and I've been working with Kara since about 2006. And I am so thrilled that we have CQ University working with us on this conference. It's really a phenomenal experience. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you. Dawn, you're the next person on my row of pictures.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Dawn White. I am in Virginia. I'm not on the board of RTM, but I am in the cohort 1 of the fellowship, and I'm really enjoying this.
Well, thank you. Welcome. Patrick, you're next on my row of pictures.
Hi, I'm Patrick Palmieri. I'm a research methodologist, doctoral student mentor, and international researcher, and I'm glad to be here.
And did you tell us where you're located?
Well, I'm located in many different places in the world. It depends on the time of the year. So, yeah. So I moved from the United States to Peru to Bolivia to many different locations. It just depends on the time of the year.
Wonderful. Thank you, Patrick. Glinda, you're next on my list.
Thank you. So I'm Glenda Hobdell. You may see on my background there, I am from CQ University, so we are absolutely thrilled to be involved, and I was more than excited to see the invitation to be involved as a presenter as well, and discussion participant and so on. I'm in Mackay in Australia, and CQ University is truly a national university. We had 26 campuses around Australia before COVID hit, and it's not much short of that now. So Mackay is one of our major locations, and yeah, I'm very excited to see where we go with this discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you. Regina. You're on mute. Yep.
Yay, I'm not first.
You're not first.
Okay. Hi, Regina Ward, in New York City. And I'm a doctoral student in the second cohort of the fellowship.
And for those of you who don't know, because I know that you've heard a couple of people refer to the research fellowship. So RTM offers a 2-year doctoral and postdoctoral research fellowship in classic grounded theory and grounded action. And so 2 of the people that are on the call today are part of that research fellowship. So if you're interested in hearing more about it, just please reach out to me and I'd be happy to tell you more, but just so that you know what they're referring to. Okay, so the first part of the theme is listening. It's about listening. And so listening is the foundation of qualitative research. It's not simply about hearing the words, but about attending deeply to the meaning, the context, and even the silence. So the first question for us to discuss tonight is, how do you practice deep listening in your research? And anyone can jump in, because this is going to be like an open discussion.
I'll
I'm
go
happy.
first.
Oh, sorry, someone else can go. Go for it, Lisa.
There are many steps that occur to practicing deep listening. We all think about how listening happens when doing the actual interviews and you're allowing your participants to speak without interruption, but it goes way beyond that. Listening really does occur in the review of the transcripts and listening to the playback of the interviews. Listening happens by watching facial expressions or visual cues that occur. Were they upset or were they excited? What did they say? Did their voice get softer or more excited? These are all things that I associate with deep listening.
Linda?
Thank you. Yeah, everything that you said resonates definitely, Dawn, because my research involved many interviews, but mainly it was 3 years of participation with artists and arts educators. And that 3 years was interrupted by COVID. So listening was very important at that time in particular. The main thing that I do correlate listening with is contextually around my human and non-human participants, because it was transmedia praxis, which involved technology becoming very much a part of the collaboration as well. So it's something that I'm listening not just to the direct connections that were happening there and the reverberations around that, but I'm listening to the bigger picture as well. I'm listening to what all of this means in a process of creative collaboration. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense because it's quite complex. My research is post-qualitative. So it does have a qualitative base with the collection of the interviews and the discussion panels and all the other stuff that happened in there. But in particular, it is around the analysis being about connectivity. It's about the relationships that happened in a very rhizomatic way. Apologies if that's a little grey.
No, it's good. Lisa, I think I saw your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. So I've had the experience of being able to interview people live in front of them, and then also working with people through Zoom. And then I've had done some just looking at archival information. And I must agree with what both Dawn and Glenda were talking about, and that is when deep listening occurs for me, it is a total immersion of myself in that moment so that I can really get a feel for what is going on. What is this interviewee really trying to say? What concepts can I gather out of it? Not the exact words, but in the bigger picture. And I have found actually that the recordings have been most useful so that I can go back and really delve deeper. Like the first time I may get an inkling of what's going on, but man, when I listen to it the second, third, however many times, I really do get a sense of what's going on, and it is much more profound for me the more I listen and the deeper I allow myself to delve into it. Thank you.
Lisa, I'll jump off of something you said about recording it. I have found that recording frees me to listen deeply because I don't need to like worry about as much about like, am I capturing everything in my field notes? And like, I really want to be present with the people that I'm interviewing and really focused on what they're saying in that present moment rather than worrying about like, am I capturing what I need for my data? And I think that that really helps me. And I think it's really important to make that connection with the participants in order to so that they feel heard, that we're really listening to them and we're not just trying to kind of use them for the data. Patrick.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful that when we're using the word listen, that we then also speak about hearing.
Mhm.
Because I think when we speak about reflection, reflection comes from the hearing part, not from the listening part. So, I mean, we're all listening to each other right now in this conversation, correct? But I'm hearing what people are saying. Why? Because my cognitive processes are churning and I understand what's meant by what people are saying. The reason why I mentioned the word hearing is because many of us do qualitative research in different contextual frameworks or different paradigms. For example, some of us work in the constructivist paradigm. Some of us work in more empirical paradigms. Some of us work in an interpretivist paradigm. So when you're listening, right, that's pure words coming into your brain, correct? But our brains are filters, our brains are processors, our brains make analysis, our brains can make constructions, can make interpretations. So I think we have to be very cautious when we use the word listen and we use the word hearing on top of it. And then we also need to make sure that when we're speaking about listening, that we're in the context of the study in which we're doing, the study in which we're performing. Because it's not universal across what all of us are speaking about is not universal across all methods and methodologies of qualitative research, right? And that's what I want to make sure of. The second part I would add is that when we speak about listening, that means that we're performing qualitative interviews, correct? In such a way that they're conversational, we maximize the information that we gain from the participants. So I think these are important aspects of qualitative research that's not really often discussed in the literature, but they're realistic parts of how we do our work as researchers, correct? Thank you.
Marie.
I just wanted to follow up on something that Patrick said, because I think that that really rings true to me. I think that, to go into an interview and actually listen and hear someone is, it all starts on the quality of how you enter into that interview, whether you're going in there relaxed and open and without preconception. And I think that for me anyway, like that's probably one of the most important pieces that I try to remember, to just sit down, take a breath. I'm there to learn, use that beginner's mindset and take it from there.
Okay, anyone else, or are we ready to move on to the next question? Okay, the next question. What challenges have you faced in ensuring marginalized or underrepresented voices are truly heard? Lisa?
Going to take a lesson from Patrick and say there what is marginalized in the general public may not be what everybody thinks marginalized is. And so we have to be careful with how we denote marginalized. I think that's the lesson that I learned from what Patrick was saying a minute ago. I actually don't know that I've had a lot of experience with marginalized populations. I would say, though, that I hope if ever I am working with marginalized populations, no matter if it's in the sense, the typical sense that we think of, or just in a more grander viewpoint. I do hope that I have the patience to really listen and hear what's being said to me. Thank you.
I will jump in there. So my stance on the marginalised word is quite different because, as I said, I worked with 9 people for an extended period of time. There was a marginalisation appeared there because it was about not just working with people who didn't know about technology and the arts. So I've probably forgot the arts part before, but it was about a safe space of inquiry for those that didn't and those that did. So that was a really interesting blend because I had working with me were and not under me, but with me were really highly accomplished digital projection artists and also people who had been teaching in secondary schools for up to 30 years who had no idea about technology at all and really didn't see its place in the arts, but also community. And that marginalisation, I guess, happened there because a lot of community, being in a regional community, and from a metropolitan background prior to being here, a lot of local audiences really did not understand the capacity of technology to be integrated into artwork with traditional media. So that marginalisation was there, but it was a careful listening, leading, learning along the way to put all of the context in there. And this is why I put my hand up for this, because it just so fitted everything to do with the Congress. It was really important that I did do all of those things, that I did stand back but be involved as well and be a really important part of the whole process, as everyone was. So safety was a key thing for me, and listening to voices and responding to voices and sharing voices as well. It wasn't just Glenda as expert.
Marginalization is an interesting word because we can work with marginalized populations, right? Like I work with women living with HIV. Um, Specifically, I work with Black women living with HIV who want to become pregnant, right? In my research, and I also work with Black women who are seeking prenatal care. You know, these different types of populations, and obviously those are individuals who are marginalized, and in the data you can see the marginalization, right, in the what stories that they tell. I think there's another type of marginalization, which is where we as researchers dismiss or limit or shrink or decide that what people are saying to us is not important. And I think that's another way of marginalizing the contextualizing interviews from people who are maybe are not marginalized but have ideas about marginalized people or marginalized thinking, right? That we dismiss. So I think we have to be careful when we talk about marginalized, because we can marginalize people in our research. They can be white Caucasian males and we can marginalize what they think, right? Saying, well, you don't matter anymore, right? I mean, that's a popular trend in the political talk, right? But there's some basis in it in terms of research, because I read research sometimes. I'm seeing that we're focusing on a marginalized population more than the generalized, the larger population, right? And that's just as bad as us not focusing on the marginalized population. And so what does that mean? Did a systematic review, right? Found that Black women living with HIV are the majority of the women living with HIV, but there is no subgroup analysis in any of the research. That's clearly marginalizing a marginalized population, right? But I could reverse this the opposite way, right? I could be studying something that's a large issue, for example, like cancer, and not include men in prostate cancer in that type of study, right? And I've just marginalized a large group of people. So I think we have to be careful, because that word marginalized can be moved and moved around like 360, right? And number two, we have to be very cautious that we don't allow political speak into the research world, which I'm seeing that creep in more and more with colleagues, where they speak with political words in their dialogues that are scientific, right? So I think we have to be careful about that word marginalization in general for these reasons. Thank you.
What do you mean by political words?
I mean, people bringing in words that are clearly from like the Wall Street Journal or from CNN. I hear a word come up in conversations with researchers, and that word's never been used before in any research conversation I've been in. And then I learned later it was a story on CNN, for example.
Hmm.
So I think the problem is that I'm finding that lots of researchers, and I think this is why the CDC and the FDA are getting in trouble now, is because people are not staying in their scientific lanes. And what do I mean by that? I have to be objective as a scientist, right? As a researcher in what I'm doing and what I'm saying. I can't just make things up because I think they ought to be that way. And what worries me is when I hear these political words, and if you listen carefully, you'll start hearing them in scientific conversations, like when we have conversations about gender and sex, right? As a scientist, I'm speaking many times about sex, male, female. I realize that there are different genders, and I recognize those. And in my research, I have to ask about that, right? But I can't like combine the two terms because politically it's expedient for people, right? Because they're not. They have roles in research. So I think we have to be very cautious when we're speaking about marginality, and intersectionality is another one, another important part of what we do in research, right? And it relates to marginalization. But I think we have to be careful that we stay very fixed as scientists, right? Social scientists, maybe in some cases, but not political scientists, because that's a whole different realm of research. Okay, that's kind of where I was going with that.
Thank you.
And one of the things that I like about classic grounded theory is that we bound our studies. And so we go beyond the boundaries only to limit ourselves, and then we state in classic grounded theory the limits that we will function under. And that I find is very appealing to me as a researcher, because it allows me to be very definitive in what I'm studying, and others know as well.
All those things, I may be going off script, and if I am, I apologize, but all those things that we were just talking about really make me think about how important it is to have a good mentor or a research colleague, because as you were talking, Patrick, like I don't think that I use political words, but maybe I do and I don't recognize it. I'm not sure. But it just made me think about that importance of collaboration and mentorship throughout anyone's research process. It doesn't end I guess.
I can give you a specific example. Latinos are offended by the word Latinx across the board. I mean, there's research on this, okay?
Mhm.
That X on the end has a communist connotation to it in Latin America,
Oh,
okay?
yeah.
We have a language that's called Spanish, right? And our Spanish has rules. Congresista with an A, which is feminine, right? I
Mhm.
mean, congresistas are very powerful, right? They're members of Congress, but it has an A on the end of it, right? So when people start speaking about Latino, Latina, Latinx, that O and A is simply part of the language. I mean, it's like it's masculine or feminized, but it's not, it's attached to the verb. But people who are not living in the culture of being a Latino, right? The culture, not living in other places that are Latino rather than areas of other countries that are Latino, they feel the need to usurp or to colonialize, to use a better word, to usurp the authority of our authority, right? To have this language and to make up the language in the way they see fit, in the American way, for example. So I think we have to be very cautious when we're speaking as scientists. And I think this gets back to that marginalization thing again, because that word Latinx marginalizes a great deal of the Latino population. And the Hugh has a huge study about that. I mean, 85% of Latinos don't, even in the United States, don't like that word, right? So I think people have to recognize that our language is very personal. And you don't see the folks in Spain changing the language because of some decision made, just like the Gulf of Mexico is still what? The Gulf of Mexico. Nobody's changed it to the Gulf of America around the world, right? And that has a connotation for this word Latinx. It really is offensive to Latinos, but most people refuse to recognize that.
One thing I want to encourage is for everyone to go and check out our videos. We actually have multiple videos for this conference that touch on this topic. So we've got some wonderful discussions going on there. So I encourage you to go over and engage with the recordings and make comments for those researchers that are out there, engaging in these topics. Okay, so once we've listened and really heard, as Patrick, brought up, the next step is learning. So let's turn there. I just taught a qualitative course, and in the last session, I told the students that we as qualitative researchers always learn more than what we can cover when we present our research. We always learn more than we can put in a presentation or a manuscript. There's always more. Like, we can only fit what we can fit, and we always learn more. So qualitative research is as much about what we learn as researchers as it is about what we report. So the next question is, how do you stay open to being changed by what you learn from participants and data, even when it challenges your assumptions?
That's a great question. I always begin my research knowing that I'm likely to leave with more questions than answers. I teach a lot of classes, and I tell that to my students a lot. I try to intentionally set aside assumptions to allow the data to actually speak to me. And I try to scribble notes to track moments when my thinking shifts or it starts to deepen. And I try to do peer debriefing and reviewing my transcripts over and over again. Like, I think it was Lisa that was saying that you just read it and listened and listened and listened. It helps me stay open to new interpretations, and even when when it surprises me or challenges me, um, I never know that I'm going to find. It just happens. You just can't force it.
Thanks, Dawn. That all makes a lot of sense. From my perspective, the learning was deep through this process, and I'm actually in my final stages of write-up for this doctoral study, which went on for 8 years. And I'm ahead of course, and lots of pressure and so on as well. So I've had to step back, and I've had to really look at the data, think back to exactly what occurred in those times, and the data was exhaustive. It was just not exhaustive, it was exhausting. There's so much of it that did actually occur and was gathered. So I've just jotted down a few notes as I've been listening to Dawn speak as well, and the questions involved. And the way that I remain open to learning and continue to remain open to learning is in analyzing that data in a very rhizoanalytical way, which means that I'm not applying coding. I started in that space and it just wasn't working for this particular research. I've moved to the rhizoanalysis, which is about this messy field of what have the ruptures been? Where have the confluences happened here? Where have reverberations occurred? And what shifts have there been in knowledge along the way? My knowledge as well as the participants' experiences and their growth. So for me, learning has been a really steep learning curve. And because my master's research was practice-based or practice-led, arts practice. And the learning that occurred there for me, I've transferred into this study as a backbone for the study. But so much learning has occurred, and I'm emerging as a much, much deeper thinker than I was before. So it wasn't just about me saying, this is what we're going to do. It was about, what can I learn from you? What can I learn from listening to you? And the change that has occurred, not just for people in the project, participants, but for others as well, including myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the other thing I was going to say is I think other people here have something to comment on this, because I think the other thing is, if you're learning as you're doing your research, then that research continues forward in some other form. And so I think Dawn, you should probably speak about your research with the women, and what was learned and why you're onto your new study. You know what I mean? Because it was a very, I mean, when we were working on her data and her original study, looking at the phenomenology, we realized there's something bigger here that we may not have seen before, right? And so then she carried on with that work, and I'm sure all of you have got examples where you have this work, and I mean, the work with the women living with HIV was so impressive upon me. I went back to finish a systematic review to specifically look at that population because I realized that the literature was not reporting that group of women. And although that's in a systematic review, it's the same point. We're learning as we're doing all of our research, and we have probably a responsibility, even an ethical responsibility, to continue forward with the research to help people get better or to learn more so that people can have a better life, right? With the research that we're doing. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, my research, it's funny because you have to put everything aside, all your thoughts, your assumptions, everything. When I was doing I was working with Parkinson's disease caregivers, the women that had their husbands had Parkinson's, and it's so interesting because one of the main things that came out of it was the women were all over the age of 60 that I was interviewing. And one of the main things that came up over and over again was now they're driving. They have to do all the driving. And so, with the younger population, it's probably not that big a deal. But from that age group, um, the husbands were always the drivers. They were always the ones that toted Miss Daisy wherever Miss Daisy wanted to go. But now their husbands are not able to do that anymore. So now they're stuck doing it. And it's a real burden on them. They really talked about that over and over again. Looked in the literature, there's nothing there about it. So you don't, that was a feminology. So I did a literature review ahead of time. And I never would have thought that that would have come out of that study.
And Don, I just want to add what was remarkable for me is what we saw in the data that led you to your next study was that I felt like the women, and I did, this is another point about hearing and listening. Dawn did all the interviews and I was looking at all the data, the like written data, right? And so the point was, I said, Dawn, I get the feeling that some of these women feel like relief that their husbands are approaching the end, but they're sad at the same time. The relief because they're this burden that they have as a caregiver, right? And then she gets a letter from one of her one of her caregivers that was in the study, kind of detailing this type of phenomena. You know what I mean? So I think this is exciting. This is an exciting part about research, right? Is being able to connect these dots. And that's why I think these stories are so important. I think this topic is extremely important because your longitudinal research, right? The longitude of research is going to come from these inquiries leading to another inquiry.
Patrick, mine is a little corny, but it's in that same line. It's like I always think of data collection as a treasure hunt, and that I'm going out there to see like what nuggets of gold, like, or what treasures I'm going to go out and find. And so I don't want to just hear what I already know, what the literature already has told me or whatever. I'm trying to go find the new treasure out there, like what's new out there. And so I go in this like state of openness, look, like I want to, like an eagerness, curiosity, going, I want to find those new treasures that are out there in the data. And so that's part of how I stay open, is this just being receptive and really looking for that, what I call the new treasures. Any other comments? Okay, the next question. Reflexivity is often central to this process. What strategies do you use to remain reflexive throughout your research? Well, I will start because to me it goes back to what Patrick said about the difference between between listening and hearing, and that reflexivity is that key, right? Like it's the key between hearing or listening and then really hearing what our participants are saying, because it has to do with that mental effort of really trying to understand what they're what we've heard.
Yeah, that's very resonant. Definitely. One of the practices that I have kind of laid over this research of mine was around dialectic practice or dialectical practice, and that for me was about encounters. It was about listening and learning through those encounters. It was about dialogues that occurred there, and those dialogues were not always verbal. And also the narratives that occurred from that as well. So being reflexive for me was about, yes, stepping out of Glenda and moving into the space of the research, definitely, and the participants in there.
I agree
Thank you.
with you. It's my responsibility to tell the story through the words of my participants, and I really feel privileged that they entrust me with their experiences. And the last thing I want to do is to distort their meanings by letting my assumptions influence the interpretation. I mean, it's not the right thing to do.
Exactly. And I mean, when you're working with a group for an extended period of time, 3 years for a bunch of teachers and artists is a very long time to stay together. And that was no mean feat. So I needed to definitely do what you were saying, Dawn, and that is to step back, to be involved, but tell the story of those people, tell the story of those participants, not from my lens, but everybody's lens, and in particular theirs. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, that leads us right into kind of the next area. So learning leads us naturally to a question of responsibility. How do we use what we've learned? And that brings us to leading change. Qualitative research doesn't just end with analysis. It often points to possible action. So in what ways can qualitative research contribute to meaningful change in practice or policy or communities?
Well,
I think.
Oh,
Go ahead, sorry.
no, you go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
No, go ahead, Lisa.
I was just going to say that qualitative findings can really empower a community by it validates their experiences. It gives them a voice of this, a lot of time is not heard.
yeah. I was going to mention that I think most research lends itself to some sort of action if people just take a moment to step aside and see where it can be applied. And I I like the concept of grounded action. I think RTM does a real great job of teaching it and letting people make that change and guiding people. And I know that's not the only type of action out there. So I would just say take some research that you find interesting if you don't have some of your own and move it towards something that will be useful for mankind.
Mhm. Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm realizing is sometimes just publishing a paper in the journal doesn't really have any impact on the people that we're doing research with. And I'm starting to come to that conclusion. And it actually started even with the work that Dawn and I were doing, where I realized that these older women were like not able to drive, right? And and that's publishing that in a journal doesn't really help anybody, does it? But what helps is when Dawn tells the people at the Parkinson's Foundation that what she found was this, and then the Parkinson's Foundation can do something about it, right? So I think one of the things I'm starting to realize as an aging researcher is that publications are better for me than they are for participants in reality, no? I really am getting to the point that I'm getting tired of people publishing cross-sectional study after cross-sectional study after cross-sectional study so they can get promoted and tenured, right? But their participants really get nothing out of that. And I think we're kind of like in a mirage to think that publishing a study benefits my participant who's in Atlanta, Georgia, trying to get prenatal care, and she can't do it because people see her invisibly in the waiting room, right? And I think the point is that we probably have a more important ethical and moral responsibility, not just for intervention studies, because they're expensive to do, and we have to get funding usually to do them. But one intervention is writing policy papers, right? That we send directly to a politician who's interested in the topic with our research, right? So that publication becomes valuable then. Or send, I mean, for example, I don't want to get into the politics, but look at the Supreme Court. They grabbed some ridiculous piece of research and incorporated it into a major ruling. Remember that? So people that are judges and people who are congressmen and women, I mean, these folks have power to change things and to fund things, right? And I think the question then becomes for me is when I do this research, the audience needs to probably be somebody with some sort of document or some sort of presentation, somebody who can do something about it, right? I mean, who's going to help the older women drive with these husbands that are parking? It's going to be the foundation, not me. And certainly publishing it in a journal is not going to help, right? But that journal publication given to the right hands can be the evidence to produce something else, right? Like the funding, for example, or the little program to help the women learn how to drive. The women learn how to drive. The same thing with these women and these black women being completely ignored in research in terms of subsample, subpopulations. I just drafted some letters and sent them to members of Congress with the systematic review that we did. And I said to them, when are you going to start requiring by law that researchers do subsample analysis with federal dollars, right? I mean, how is it that all these IRBs missed this? How is it all these women that it was interesting. I found one researcher who 15 years later actually did a subgroup analysis and published it. But then my question is, did you do it because it was the right thing, or did you do it because you could publish another paper? So I really think we need to ask ourselves about this concept of intervention, or putting our action, or putting our findings into action. And what does that really mean? Yes, grounded action would be one way, right? Intervention studies is another, but there's many other ways to do this. Putting a podcast on YouTube. Here's what for people who are lay people to understand your research. So many things that we can do, but we don't do any of them. Why? They don't contribute to tenure and promotion. And that's my biggest concern about this topic. See.
I enjoy your passion, Patrick. You are very passionate about what you do, as everyone in the room is. So a slightly different slant, I guess, but lots of crossovers as well. In terms of responsibility in leading change and actions, a little bit of background there. I was 30 years in Education Queensland as a secondary arts teacher, recognised for innovative practice since about 1921. And that for me was a responsibility I had as a tertiary lecturer, I'll call it, academic, and I needed to bring people into that story, even though it was a story that was already very well told through research and so on, through articles, through chapters. The important thing there for me was the regionality was important, and I had a responsibility as initially a regional person. I was brought up in a small community, to come back from metropolitan to give back to my community and to lead that action. As I progressed with the research, as the participation happened and started coming to a close, I invited the participants to, at their discretion, to hold artist talks about their work. And a lot of community members came into that. And one of the questions that they were asked was, has this made a difference to your teaching? And everybody said yes, they had applied a lot of what occurred with them in the research to their classrooms, and it was making a huge difference. So this is going to be my next research once this the doctorate is well and truly completed, and to actually see what difference has it made in their classrooms, and how has it made a difference to other people's classrooms as well.
The beautiful thing about qualitative research is that you really get an opportunity to connect with your participants. And like for me, working with caregivers, The two ladies, there were actually two ladies that reached out to me after the study was complete, saying the same thing about, what comes next? My spouse has passed away. But at least they had somebody to go to. In a quantitative study where it's a survey that goes out and you just get this email and you fill out the survey and it's done. And you don't really connect with whoever is doing the research. So this is really a good opportunity for, these people that have something very important to say to get that information or to know who to go to get that information out.
The next question, you guys are already like integrating it in, so I'm going to throw it out there to continue this conversation is, can you share an example from your own work where your research contributed to or at least sparked change? And it doesn't have to be, it can just, don't think change, don't think big change, just action, right? Like just action.
I'll go again. Sorry, I don't want to dominate here in any way. And I'd love to hear some other people around this one. But when within the first probably 5 months of initiating this project with the participants, there was a tendency for everyone to stay in their silos, which is a regional thing as well. Okay, it's not just regional, but they wanted to stay in their lane, working with what they were working with, not necessarily sharing too much with other people and so on. So I could see there was a real need for change to occur there, and my leadership of that changed. So what I ended up doing was really researched heavily around this thing called creative collaboration. What does that mean? How is it different to group creativity? And in doing that, I thought very deeply about it, and I put together a framework for what I call collaborative flow. It's not yet completely out there in the world. It is in my presentation, but this collaborative flow post-COVID isolation, I was funded to put a retreat together to bring participants back together, which was an amazing, an absolutely amazing experience and an amazing opportunity for this research as well. So that involved, how do I get them out of silos? How do I help to make that process happen? And what I did is I put together, through this collaborative flow diagram, a series of activities and experiences that they would collectively go through. And I was part of that as well as a participant and a creative collaborator in there, and finding the threads that brought them together. What was there that had showed any connection about their work, their current work, and how could that take them further? And then I gave them a number of provocations, but the main one was, in 5 hours, in these collective groups that you now are now in, because you have identified yourself connections between each of you, you now have developed trust and so on. How can you put together a video-based work in 5 hours, which in some way connects your work? And they did that. And at the end of the 5 hours, there was a projection, I guess, gallery happened at night, and everyone discussed it and so on. That was a pivotal moment for this research, because they now trusted one another. They worked together. They weren't all completely cohesive in how they did that. So there were different roles taken on in doing it, but that all became part of the research data and the discussions that occurred. But that was step one in really leading that change that occurred from that point on. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. For me, my dissertation research was about I used classic grounded theory and developed a theory about how people navigate new experiences. My original area of interest was adult learners kind of returning to school, kind of after a prolonged break. What I discovered was more general than that, and I had the opportunity. I, for a while, led a group for new moms, and so I was able to help mentor new moms through those first few, like, kind of 0 to 5 time period. Um, and help mentor them as they navigated the new experience of motherhood. And then, I have spent the last 20 years working with doctoral research students and helping them navigate their research. And now I run RTM and help, researchers from around the world navigate their research studies. And so my research, I've been able to apply it in different settings, which has been really rewarding for me. Um,
This is a difficult question, I think, because my name's not Anthony Fauci with like $20 billion for research, right? From the NIH. So I think that when we think about the impact of our research, we have to think about like in the context in which we're doing it, right? And Glenda, that's kind of what you did is you put it in your context, which is good because Dawn, when I hear you speak about your research and the part that I know about it, I mean, you're having a major impact on the lives of these women living after death now, right? Of husbands with Parkinson's because you're informing the foundation on how to make their best investments, right? In the limited resources they have to make the lives of those women better. In my case, I mean, I've contributed to in the case of people living with HIV, our grounded theory study that we made, which was in Peru, in reality changed the way in which medications were prescribed because an unintended finding of that study was people in the provincias, the areas external to the main city of Lima, were not receiving the same medication regimens that other people were receiving because this was a line of research. There's like 5 studies that ended up with this grounded theory, but in one of the initial ones, we reported in the literature that these medications were not being delivered the way they said they were being delivered by the ministry in the provinces. Well, this caused a big stir in the nation. I didn't even expect it. It was just a small sentence, a statement in one article, but somebody grabbed onto it here at home and was like, "Why, my God, we're discriminating against people, right?" And it became a big deal for the ministry to make sure that everybody received the same medications, right? Not an inferior level of medication. So, and I think the other thing I would add is and this is not an intended part of research, but I guess it's one of the parts of it. When you're doing research with Black women who are seeking prenatal care in Atlanta, Georgia, and then you read the transcripts, we're still in the process of putting the transcripts to putting together the manuscript. You start realizing that what you actually hear on the news is true. You know what I mean? That a lot of it's true because you hear directly from people who are experiencing these problems. And these women were grateful to have their story heard. I mean, there's a therapeutic effect to being able to tell your story. And I think then being able to share, like Dawn knows, I'm very, 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 very big on we need to use pseudonyms in our manuscript so people know what was said by them. So when we give them the manuscript, they can know who they were and they can identify how their data was used in that manuscript, right? And I think that's a big important part of qualitative research is that I want these folks to know that we wrote about what they told us, right? Right or wrong, because different methods, have different ways. You can check back with them in some methods, other methods you can't. I mean, but the point is they can see how their data was used, right? And I think what's powerful about that is that they can feel like their voices were heard, at least by somebody such as myself, right? So I think there's different touch points for this. I'm not going to cure HIV in my work, but I certainly had an impact on people living with HIV in a certain area of Peru, right? And I think that's what we need to really understand is that each of us have our local impact. It's probably very strong, and we're not talking about it because we don't even realize that we have that impact. And that's why I paused to say anything, is because like, let me think about that carefully, right? Because I'm not doing this research for myself, and then I don't always think about what I'm doing, like to make a bigger impact with what the research is that I'm doing, right? And so I think this is important.
Patrick, I think you said something really important about that we don't always know what impact our research is having. We don't know who has read it and who has built their study on top of, like built on top of and furthered our work. We don't know, what practitioner has read our studies and used it, to influence what they're doing. And so, um, I think that sometimes we may feel like our research didn't have much of an impact, but I often feel like it may have more impact than you know.
And hopefully more than your H index, because I'm getting tired of all this H index stuff, to be quite frank with you. It's like a, it's my ego impact, right? That's what they should call it, the E impact.
Okay, so we've looked at listening and we've looked at learning and we've looked at leading change individually. Now let's bring them together. How do listening, learning, and leading change come together in your research practice?
I'm too busy and don't have enough time to do all the things I need to do.
I think for me, it's the grounded action piece where it all comes together. And like I said earlier, there's lots of different ways to do action research, but that speaks volumes to me.
For me, the three ideas are really inseparable. Listening is where it starts, and you're really listening to your participants and understanding their stories beyond just the surface level. And then learning comes from being open to what their stories are teaching us, especially when they challenge what we think is going on. And then leading change then becomes the natural extension of that process. Because you're truly listening and learning, you can't help but want to do something with what you've heard. And so for that, to make practice, use it for practice, use it for education, a policy, they all that would be good, but bringing them all three together is really where it starts.
I agree with Dawn there. For me, they're not linear at all. They are completely overlapping and
Very
coexist.
confounded.
I think the other thing I would say is that I think you start realizing that you can expose things like that have never been exposed before. Does that make sense? So, for example, like in Peru, there's a lot of problems right now with like women not getting child support payments because our judiciary system is so horrible. You know what I mean? And it's a terrible situation. So, I decided to work with some law students who have to do thesis, and I've asked them to do some research focused on phenomenology, the lived experience, right, of these women, especially the low resourced women. And so something that we know to be true, but everybody takes for granted that it's just, we just talk about it. As researchers, we can take all of this knowledge that we have and put that together, right? To really understand phenomena that are detrimental to marginalized groups of people, right? And I don't think sometimes we understand that we can actually seek out projects or work with people to complete projects that can expose a major problem in such a way that policymakers and other researchers can start dealing with it, right? Because qualitative research is about what? Discovering new things, discovering how phenomena works or doesn't work, or what phenomena is, right? That's not really been reported in our literatures, right? I mean, we don't just go out and do phenomenology in areas that we have like lots of, or grounded theory, even probably in areas that we have a huge body of literature and we know everything about it, right? And so I think that sometimes we can also be the because of all of our experience, knowledge, and education, and and research abilities, we can go out and make differences in areas that other people will get benefit from, right? And I think that's the most exciting part about me about being an old researcher now, because I'm transitioning from being like, it's kind of like this imposter syndrome. You're like, really? I'm a senior researcher now? You're kind of like, me? It doesn't feel like that, but it's the case because you're the person that can make this influence on other people to do good research that will expose problems in society, right? That we can actually find solutions for. See.
You're a mature researcher, Patrick.
Yeah. Or my friend says seasoned, and I said that sounds like when you like season a
Salt and
chicken,
pepper.
right? Yeah, I'm a Jamaican chicken, it's like, yeah.
That's it. I'll if I can backtrack a little bit or move forward a little bit, and this idea of leading change, but listening, learning, and leading change as a cohesive collection of what we do. I see it as it wasn't just my role, and this resonates with everyone, I'm sure. It wasn't just my role to do those three things and to do them at once. It was the role of everyone, not exclusively a Glenda position. Okay, so everyone involved, including audiences, everybody involved in this research was responsible for part or all of those three things as well.
Okay, our final question for this session. Finally, what advice would you offer to emerging researchers who want their work to be both rigorous and impactful?
Yeah, I'm
Eric,
listening.
sorry, carry on.
No, I was just saying, yeah, I'm listening. I'm an emerging researcher. So, what advice could you give me?
I was going to mention that everything we've talked about today is really important in terms of advice for you. Regina, I've seen you madly writing as we go, and I've been doing my share of that just so I keep on track, because I'm just straight out of a big writing session at 4 o'clock this morning. But yeah, that the idea of the responsibility you have as a researcher, I think, is something that really needs to come from this for advice to everybody else. And very difficult to single any one thing out, because the discussions have been rich and there's so much that has been kind of put on the table by different people with different approaches to research, different methodologies and so on. But being part of it is really important, not being outside of the research participants' journeys, and having that lens which is very involved with what's going on. Very empathetic to what's going on as well. I've heard so much empathy in the room today, and that co-participation is really important.
My advice is to approach research with humility, curiosity, and respect. And you are the voice. You got to honor your participants and what information they've given to you.
I think you need to make sure you have a good mentor to guide your research, because I'm going to tell you, I mean, fortunately, I've not had this experience. Well, I should say I had this experience, and that's why I left one institution to go to another. Um, if you're doing research with a research mentor who's only about getting like R01, R03 grants, and keeping their laboratory like to be the top in the country, and has very little time for you, that's not a very productive relationship for you. And you have to make decisions when you decide to go to those places, because yeah, it's great, it's very prestigious and all this, right? But you get very little time and attention from these folks. So I think you need to ask yourself, what do you want to get out of your education, especially as a doctoral student? And ask yourself, is this mentor going to be able to provide any time to me, right, to do my research and to teach me how to do research? And I think that's a key part of being successful as a novice researcher, is making sure that you have your boots, right? You're a fireman, you need a boot, you need at a minimum what, your helmet, your boots, right? Your jacket, and your proverbial axe, right? And if you don't have those things, you're not going to be successful. So I think you need to be realistic about who you select as a mentor, because in most universities now, it's unfortunate that we try to force students into having a mentor rather than letting them select who's going to be their mentor, and then the mentor not selecting who they want to be their mentees, right? And that's like a relationship that you have for the rest of your life. So it's really important that you focus on having good mentorship.
I'd like to suggest perseverance. No matter what stage you're at, novice or more experienced, life can get in the way, and I would highly suggest something that I guess Kara taught me eons ago. Every day, do a little something, even if all you're doing is taking a few minutes to think about it. Just keep going.
Don't fear crying a lot. Even today, I mean, I get some reviews back from reviewers, and I just have a couple of tears because I'm just so upset about it. I don't get mad anymore. I'm just so I was like, how is this possible? You know? So yeah, yeah.
I will say one of the things that I think is important is to remember that quality is more important than quantity. Like, that your work is going to be more impactful if it's quality. If it's junk, it's never going to amount to anything. And so focus on the quality rather than the quantity. And then the other thing I would say is find a community to belong to, right? Like it's hard to navigate life, let alone research alone. And so find a community to belong to support you, to be there, to ask questions to pat you on the back when you, even if it's virtually, when you get the review back or the feedback from your reviewer, or right, like we all sometimes need a shoulder to cry on, or a helping hand. And so find that community that can support you with your research endeavors. And if you're looking for one,
I was getting ready.
RTM is here. That is what we are about, is put, communities of researchers who want to support each other in doing rigorous and impactful research.
I was getting ready to say that. I've really feel like I've made so much success with RTM and, working on my first grounded theory study. My theory is written up and I just have to finish it up, and it's been a whirlwind, but it's been exciting every step of the way. And I couldn't have done it without the mentorship that I've received from RTM.
Thank you, Dawn. Anyone else have something they want to say? Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for joining this discussion today and sharing your insights. Today's discussion reminds us that qualitative research is not just about the methods, it's about the relationships, the responsibilities, the potential to shape a better future through listening and learning and leading change.